Mom married her new husband, and they erased me from their new family. The day I turned 18, I erased myself from her life, and what followed was pure chaos. My mom married her new husband, built this shiny new perfect family, and quietly erased me from the picture. On the day I turned 18, I returned the favor. I erased myself from her life, and she did not handle it well at all. You're about to hear exactly how that went down. Hey, I'm Jake. I'm 21 now, but this whole mess started when I was 15. Back then, it was just me and my mom, Patricia. My dad had died when I was 8. One random heart attack at 40Y2, and just like that, he was gone. One day, he was holding the back of my bike seat, laughing while I tried not to crash, and a few months later I was standing in an itchy suit at his funeral, while relatives I barely knew told me he was in a better place. For years after that, it was just the two of us in my dad's house. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, quiet street, paid off because of his life insurance. We didn't have extra money lying around, but the bills were paid, the lights were on, and there was always food in the fridge. More importantly, we had routines. Friday movie nights on the couch, breakfast for dinner on Wednesdays, camping trips every summer at the same state park my dad loved. Those little things mattered. They made it feel like even though Dad was gone, he was still part of our lives. Mom would pull out old photo albums and point out dumb little details. The ugly hat he refused to stop wearing. The way he smiled crooked when he was trying not to laugh. She used to say, "It's you and me against the world, kiddo." And I believed her. Then Richard showed up, and everything I thought was solid started slipping away. At first, it just felt like my mom was dating again. No big deal, right? But here's where things start to twist. Richard didn't just join our life. He replaced it. So, picture this. I'm 15, just starting to feel like life is finally kind of normal again. It's been years since my dad passed. I'm used to it being just me and Mom, and yeah, money isn't amazing, but we're okay. Then one day, she comes home from some work conference acting different. She's smiling more, checking her phone constantly, humming while she cooks. That's when I first hear his name. Richard. Richard, the successful businessman who owns a pharmaceutical distribution company. Richard, who drives a luxury car that looks like it belongs in a commercial. Richard, who lives in one of those gated neighborhoods where the HOA will fine you for breathing wrong. Mom talks about him like she just unlocked a secret cheat code to adult life. Suddenly, our little paid-you-off house and frozen pizza on Fridays don't seem good enough for her anymore. The changes start small. New clothes, new hairstyle. She used to live in sweatpants and messy buns on weekends, but now it's blouses, heels, and getting her nails done. She starts talking about wine tastings, charity events, and the country club like these are completely normal things for her. When she comes back from dates, she tells me about Richard's vacation home in Colorado, his boat, his connections, his lifestyle. It's like she's giving me a tour of a world I'm clearly not invited into. At first, she tries to include me. Richard comes over for dinner a few times. He's polite in that practiced way rich people are polite. Firm handshake, too much cologne, generic small talk. How are your grades? Play any sports? Thinking about college yet? He asks questions, but his eyes kind of glaze over halfway through my answers, and he keeps checking his phone like he's waiting for someone more important to text him. I can tell he sees me as part of the package deal that came with dating my mom, not as an actual person. Still, Mom seems happy, so I try to be cool about it. I sit through awkward dinners. I listen to her ramble about his business trips and his friends. I watch her laugh at jokes that aren't really funny. Part of me misses the old version of her, the one who burned pancakes and refused to wear makeup on weekends. But another part of me thinks, maybe she deserves this. Maybe she deserves something nice after everything she's been through. About 6 months in, the tone shifts. She doesn't ask what I think. She just starts dropping future plans into conversation like they're already decided. Richard thinks we should get married next spring. Richard wants to buy a bigger house. Richard says joining the country club would be great for networking. Every sentence turns into, Richard thinks, Richard wants, Richard says, like she handed over steering wheel of her entire life to this guy she barely knows. The engagement happens 3 months later at some fancy restaurant I'm not invited to. She calls me from the parking lot, voice high and shaky, asking if I'm happy for her. I'm sitting on the couch in sweatpants, staring at the TV, trying to process the fact that my entire life is about to change and nobody asked if I was ready. What am I supposed to say? No, I hate this, and I miss the mom who used to watch movies in old two-shirts with me. Instead, I swallow it and say, "Congratulations," because that's what a supportive son says. When she gets home, she's glowing. The ring on her finger probably costs more than our car. She says we'll talk more later, but later never really comes. Every time I try to bring up how fast everything is moving, she brushes it off. This is a good thing, Jake. Richard is going to give us so many opportunities. It doesn't feel like us, though. It feels like she's talking about herself and his kids. Yeah, his kids. Richard has 2 kids from his first marriage. Sophia, 13, and Brandon, 10. They live with their mom most of the time, but they visit him every other weekend and on holidays. I meet them once at a forced family dinner. Sophia spends the entire time on her phone, scrolling and barely looking up. Brandon talks non-stop about video games, while Richard keeps snapping at him about table manners. They're not rude to me, but they also don't really notice I'm there. It's like I'm background noise. After the engagement, Mom starts gushing about blending families. She tells me how great it will be to have siblings, how Sophia is so excited to have an older brother, how Brandon will look up to me. None of that matches what I saw at dinner, but I let it slide. I want to believe her. I want to believe there's a version of this where we actually become a bigger, happier family instead of whatever we're slowly turning into. The wedding rolls around in the spring. It's at the country club, of course. Most of the guests are Richard's business associates and rich friends. A few of Mom's coworkers are there, but none of the people who actually knew us from before. Her excuse is, Richard wants to keep it intimate, which apparently means intimate with people who own boats, not intimate with people who saw her crying on our old couch after my dad died. I stand there in the suit she picked out, smiling for photos, clapping at speeches, going through the motions. In picture after picture, Sophia and Brandon stand front and center with Mom and Richard, looking like a perfect blended family advertisement. I'm off to the side, half cropped out, like an afterthought. In one favorite photo, I'm not even in the frame at all. It's a small detail, but it tells me everything. This new life they're building doesn't really have space for me. After the wedding, everything that had felt like a maybe this will work situation started sliding into, wow, I really don't belong here. We moved into Richard's house, this giant, polished place that looked like it had been pulled out of a magazine. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a finished basement, a pool in the backyard, and a gate at the front of the neighborhood with a guard who checked IDs like we were entering a secure facility. Mom kept saying, "Isn't this amazing, Jake? Look at what Richard is doing for us." But it never felt like us. It felt like Richard was upgrading his life, and I just happened to be in the moving truck. My room was at the very end of the upstairs hallway, as far from the master bedroom as humanly possible. It was bigger than my old room, sure, but it was also completely generic. Beige walls, plain furniture, nothing that felt like mine. No posters, no personal touches, just a bed, a desk, and a dresser, like they'd ordered the basic teen room package from some catalog. Mom said, "We can decorate it however you want later," but her voice had that distracted quality. And later, of course, never came. Sophia and Brandon's rooms, though, those were already lived in before I even finished unpacking. Posters on the walls, trophies lined up on shelves, photos with their mom and friends, matching bedding sets, little lights, everything. Their room said, "You belong here." My room said, "Temporary guest." It was a small thing, but it set the tone for everything that followed. The first summer there, the pattern locked in. Richard's kids came over every weekend, and the house instantly shifted around them. The TV in the living room played whatever Sophia wanted to watch. If I suggested a movie, she'd say she was already in the middle of a show, and nobody ever told her to compromise. If I wanted to swim, Brandon and his friends were already in the pool, yelling and splashing like they owned it. I'd stand by the sliding door, towel over my shoulder, and hear, "Oh, Brandon already invited people over. Maybe you can swim later." Later meant never. Mom started orbiting Sophia like the world's most eager planet. Shopping trips, spa days, just us girls lunches at the country club. It was like watching my old life get recast with a new lead. The things we used to do together were now their special bonding activities. When I tried to talk to Mom about it, she brushed me off with lines about how this is what blended families do, and how I should be happy she was getting close to her new stepdaughter. When I said I felt left out, she called me jealous and selfish. Sophomore year made the differences even harder to ignore. Richard's kids went to Westfield Academy, the kind of private school you see in movies, all uniforms and pristine fields and buildings that look like they've never seen a budget cut. I stayed at my regular public school, Lincoln High. When I asked about switching so we'd all be at the same place, Richard said Westfield's tuition was already a stretch with 2 kids enrolled. Mom jumped in with, "We can look into it for junior year." But we both know how that kind of promise ends. It just fades away. The money divide hit hard in other ways too. At the start of the school year, Sophia and Brandon got brand new designer backpacks, the latest phones, fresh laptops for homework. I got told my 3-year-old laptop was perfectly fine, and that I should be grateful I even had one. When I pointed out how different things were, Mom said they're used to a certain lifestyle. It would be cruel to take that away from them. I wanted to ask her what lifestyle I was supposed to be used to. Hand-me-downs and explanations? Family dinners turned into a kind of performance art. We'd all sit at this huge table like we were filming a commercial. Richard would ask Sophia detailed questions about her dance classes, her shows, her friends at Westfield. Then he'd turn to Brandon and go on about his soccer games, new cleats, tournaments. They'd talk about teachers, clubs, parties, trips. When he finally looked at me, it was always the same, flat. "So, how's school?" Like he was just ticking a box labeled, "Acknowledge other child." Mom would sprinkle in my achievements like seasoning. Jake made honor roll. Jake had a great game. Jake got a good score on his test. But it always sounded like she was reading off a list of talking points to remind herself I existed. The conversation would slide right back to Westfield, sports, and dance. I learned to keep my answers short. The worst part wasn't even Richard. It was watching my mom change. The woman who used to flip pancakes in old twa-shirts and laugh at dumb movies was now always dressed up, tennis racket in hand, heading to the club. She stopped cooking. We ordered from expensive restaurants or had pre-made meals delivered. Our old routines just vanished. No more Friday movie nights because Richard didn't like wasting time on movies. No more breakfast for dinner because he thought it was unsophisticated. No more camping because his idea of roughing it was staying somewhere without a spa. I tried bringing it up. I told her I missed the old version of us. I missed feeling like I came first for her. She snapped that I was being ungrateful. "Richard gives us stability and opportunities we never had," she said. "You need to stop clinging to the past and grow up." Apparently, missing your mom is childish. Christmas that year drove the point home with a bow on top. I watched Sophia open a brand new laptop, high-end clothes, jewelry, and an iPad, just for fun. Brandon ripped into a gaming PC, expensive headphones, collector's editions, sports gear, wrapping paper everywhere, excited yelling, big smiles. When it was my turn, I got a generic stack of clothes and a $100 Target gift card. Mom said, "Practical gifts are sometimes the best," with this fake cheerfulness that made it even worse. Later, I caught her in the kitchen and asked if she really didn't see the difference. She stiffened and said Richard's ex had certain expectations for the kids, and they had to respect that. I asked about my expectations. She told me I was almost an adult, and that material things shouldn't matter so much to me. Funny how they only become just things when it's me getting less. After that, I started staying away from the house as much as I could. I joined more clubs, hung out at friends' places, and picked up a part-time job at a hardware store. Anything to avoid sitting in that big, echoey house where every room screamed family, and none of it felt like mine. My best friend Kevin noticed. We'd been close since middle school, and one day at lunch he finally called me out. He said I'd been off all year, bailing on plans, always busy with family stuff. So I told him everything. The rich stepdad, the private school kids, the disappearing traditions, the way my mom seemed to be slowly rewriting her life without me in it. He didn't say much for a second. Then he hit me with something that stuck in my head. Your mom chose her new family over you. At least now you know where you stand. Stop waiting for her to remember you and start planning your exit. That was the first time I really let myself think about leaving. That conversation with Kevin flipped a switch in my brain. Up until then, a part of me kept hoping my mom would wake up one day, look around at her perfect little country club life, and realize she'd pushed her actual son into the shadows. After Kevin spelled it out, I stopped waiting for that miracle. If she hadn't noticed what she was doing by then, she wasn't going to. So instead of hoping she'd come back to me, I started figuring out how to get away from her. The thing that made it possible was something my dad had left behind: his life insurance. When he died, part of the payout was put into a trust fund for me. I knew it existed, but I'd never really thought about it. All I knew was that I couldn't touch it until I turned 18. Mom was the trustee, which meant she could approve money for school stuff, but she couldn't just drain it for herself. The total was around $200,000. To a 17-year-old, that might as well have been $1 billion. Once Kevin's words sank in, that number stopped being abstract. It became an exit sign. I started staying up late on my old laptop, researching what I'd actually need to move out. Apartments, deposits, utilities, budgets, jobs, all of it. I made spreadsheets. I listed out monthly costs: rent, food, gas, phone, insurance. I looked up how to open bank accounts in my own name and how to move money from a trust into a personal account once I was legally an adult. It wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was a plan. Kevin's older brother, Matt, had moved out at 18, so I cornered him one afternoon when I was over at their place. I told him I was thinking about leaving as soon as I turned 18 and asked what I was missing. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He talked about bills piling up, unexpected expenses, the stress of combining school and work. But he also said something that stuck: "It's hard, but it's worth it if staying home is killing you slowly." That's exactly how it felt. Meanwhile, back at Richard's house, things were getting worse, not better. Mom barely spoke to me unless Richard was around, and she needed to play supportive mother in front of him. Most of the time, she was focused on Sophia's sweet 16 plans or Brandon's birthday trips, or some event at the club. When she did talk to me, it was surface-level stuff. "How's school? You working this weekend? Don't forget to take the trash out." I felt less like her son and more like a long-term house guest she'd forgotten she invited. The birthday differences kept underlining the gap between us. For Brandon's 11th birthday, Richard rented out a chunk of Disneyland. There were matching shirts, photographers, hotel rooms, the works, the kind of thing you only see in commercials. When I turned 16, Mom made a cake at home, and Richard handed me a $50 bill. They cut things short because Sophia had dance practice. Nobody rented anything out for me. Nobody made matching shirts with my name on them. Senior year started, and I began counting months instead of years. My 18th birthday was in March. That became the date everything revolved around in my head. I applied to a state university 3 hours away, quietly, using my own time and school resources. I didn't even tell Mom I was sending in applications. When I got accepted with a partial academic program, I felt this mix of relief and anger. Relief because I had somewhere to go. Anger because I knew if I told her, she'd spin it like she'd somehow made it happen. When I finally mentioned the university to her, she acted shocked. Not excited first, not proud first, shocked. "We should have discussed this as a family," she said. I remember looking at her and thinking, since when do we make decisions as a family? Richard asked if I'd considered community college to save money, which was funny, considering money never seemed to be an issue when he was swiping his card for his kids' private school tuition, trips, and toys. I didn't fight them on it. I just nodded, said I'd think about it, and kept moving forward with my own plan. I filled out every form the university sent, requested housing, and contacted the person who managed my trust fund about what would happen on my 18th birthday. Legally, once the clock hit that day, they had to hand control of the money to me. By then, the house didn't even feel like a place I lived. It was more like a very fancy waiting room. I went to school, went to work, came home, stayed in my bland room, and marked off days on a hidden calendar. Every time I walk past the framed adoption photos of Richard and his kids at Disneyland or some school event, it just pushed me harder toward the exit. I wasn't in any of those pictures. And honestly, that made things easier. I knew leaving would cause drama. I knew Mom would cry and say she didn't see it coming. I knew Richard would call me ungrateful. But at that point, the idea of staying felt worse than whatever explosion would come after. I'd spent years being the extra piece in someone else's perfect family puzzle. With my 18th birthday getting closer, I decided I'd rather walk away completely than keep trying to squeeze myself into a picture that clearly wasn't meant to include me. February of my senior year, about a month before my birthday, Mom and Richard called a family meeting. That alone was weird, because we never really did family meetings. We did announcements from Richard and fake smiles from everyone else. This time, they wanted all of us in the formal living room. You know, the room nobody actually uses, but looks great in real estate photos. I sat on the edge of one of those stiff chairs. Sophia scrolling on her phone, Brandon bouncing his leg, Mom practically vibrating with excitement, and Richard doing that fake serious face he used whenever he wanted to sound important. He cleared his throat and said they had exciting news. My stomach dropped before he even finished the sentence. "We're adopting Sophia and Brandon," he said. "We're making it official. One big happy family. We'll all share the same last name." Mom beamed at him like he'd just ended world hunger. Sophia looked thrilled. Brandon grinned. They were getting upgraded from kids of divorce to kids in a shiny new family with money and legal security. I just sat there and asked the only question running through my head. What about me? The room went quiet for a second. Mom and Richard exchanged a quick look, the kind people share when they've rehearsed something. Richard gave this careful little smile. "What about you, Jake? Am I part of this?" I asked. "Are you adopting me too?" Richard jumped in first. "You're already Patricia's son. That situation is different." Mom nodded along, like they'd practiced that line. "You have your father's last name," she added. "We thought you'd want to keep that. It's a connection to him. Richard adopting you would mean changing that." They hadn't asked me what I wanted. They hadn't even brought it up before making their big announcement. They just decided I'd obviously prefer to stay separate. Mom tried to soften it by saying we could talk about it if I really wanted, but her tone made it clear she hoped I'd drop it. So I did. Not because I agreed, but because in that moment I finally understood. This new official family they were building did not include me. The adoption went through in early March, right before my birthday. Richard celebrated by throwing a party at the country club. There was a cake that said, "Welcome to the family," with their new shared last name iced across the top. Sophia and Brandon got monogrammed gifts, bags, towels, little keepsakes with their new initials. There were speeches about new beginnings, second chances, building a future together. People clapped, laughed, took pictures. I stood in the corner with a plate of shrimp I didn't really want, counting the days until my birthday and trying not to look as out of place as I felt. It was like watching a commercial for a family I didn't belong to, even though my mother was standing right there in the center of it. Then came my 18th birthday. It landed on a Thursday. I woke up in that sterile room at the end of the hallway with this heavy, calm feeling in my chest. This was it. This was the day everything changed for real, not just in my head. When I walked downstairs, Mom wasn't there. She'd already left for some errand. On the kitchen counter, she'd left a card with $100 inside and a note saying we'd celebrate this weekend. I knew what that meant. Sophia had a dance competition that Saturday, so any celebration for me would be squeezed around her schedule. Maybe a rushed dinner near the venue if there was time. I stared at the card for a minute, then put the cash in my wallet, left the card on the counter, and grabbed my keys. Instead of going to school, I drove to the bank. I walked in with my ID, birth certificate, and the trust fund paperwork I'd already gone over with the administrator. It took a while, forms, signatures, explanations, but by the end of it, the $200,000 my dad had left for me wasn't just a number on a document anymore. It was in an account under my name, under my control. The bank manager, an older woman named Helen, slid the final papers across the desk and gave me a nod. "Big day," she said. She had no idea. From there, I drove straight to the apartment complex near the university I'd been eyeing for months. I'd already filled out the application and been pre-approved, pending payment. I walked into the office, handed over a certified check for first month's rent, last month's rent, and the security deposit. In exchange, the leasing agent handed me keys. My new place was small. 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, cracked tile in the bathroom, old carpet. But when I opened that door and stepped inside, it felt bigger than any room I'd ever lived in. It was the first space in years that didn't remind me I was an extra piece in someone else's story. It was empty, but it was mine. I spent the rest of the day moving. Honestly, it didn't take long. Most of my life fit into my car. Clothes, my laptop, a few books, and a box of photos and small things that had belonged to my dad. Mom had sold or donated most of our old furniture when we moved in with Richard, so there wasn't much to take anyway. 3 years in that giant house, and I was leaving with less than I'd arrived with. By early evening, I was sitting on the floor of my new apartment with a cheap pizza, sore arms, and a weird mix of fear and relief. Kevin had helped me with the last couple loads and plopped down next to me with a soda. He looked around and said, "Dude, you actually did it." And for the first time, in a long time, I let myself feel proud instead of guilty. Later that night, around 8, I finally texted my mom. I didn't give her a whole speech. I didn't explain every feeling or list everything she'd done wrong. I just sent, "Moved out. I'm good. Don't worry about me." It took her about 5 minutes to respond. "What do you mean, moved out? Where are you?" I stared at the screen for a second, then typed back, "Got my own place. I'm 18 now. Time to start my life." I hit send, put my phone face down, and tried to focus on my pizza. That's when the storm started. My phone began buzzing nonstop. Calls, texts, notifications stacking on top of each other. First, it was confusion. "This isn't funny. You need to come home right now. We need to talk about this." Then the tone shifted to anger. "How dare you do this without telling us? After everything Richard has done for you, this is how you repay him?" Then came the guilt. "I'm your mother, Jake. Do you have any idea how worried I am? You're breaking my heart." Richard's messages had a very different flavor. His were full of words like disrespectful, ungrateful, and irresponsible. He brought up the house, the food, the roof over your head, as if I hadn't been living in my own father's paid-off house before he came around. He talked like I'd run away from a charity he'd generously extended to me, not from a situation where I'd been slowly erased. At some point, threats got mixed in. Suggestions about cutting me off from any support. Warnings about how the real world is harsh. Hints about how I'd come crawling back when I realized how good I'd had it. It was almost funny, considering I was literally sitting in the real world, in a bare apartment I'd paid for with money my actual dad had left for me. The next morning, I woke up on a donated couch in my new place, sunlight coming through cheap blinds, neck sore but chest light. When I checked my phone, it showed 40+ missed calls and a wall of texts. I scrolled through a few, saw the same cycle of panic, blame, guilt, and control, and realized it would never really stop as long as they had a direct line to me. So I sent one last message to my mom. Something simple. "I'm an adult. I have my own place. I'm fine. I'll talk to you when I'm ready." I meant it. Then I blocked her number, blocked Richard's, blocked the house phone. Just like that, the noise cut off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Those next months were not easy, but they were mine. I picked up more hours at the hardware store, learned how to budget for real, figured out which cheap foods kept me full, and slowly turned that little apartment into an actual home. A beat-up table from a yard sale here, a second-hand chair there, some thrift FT store dishes. Nothing matched, but it didn't have to. Every piece I brought in was something I chose. Kevin's family stepped in, not in a big dramatic way, but in all the small, steady ways that actually matter. His mom would text me asking if I'd eaten and invite me over for dinner a couple nights a week. His dad helped me find a better used car and came with me to make sure I didn't get ripped off. They found old furniture in their basement they weren't using and told me to take whatever I wanted. There were no speeches about family or gratitude or "after everything we've done for you." There were just open doors, extra plates at the table, and people who actually listened when I talked. That's when it really hit me. The house I'd left behind had never been a home for me. This small, imperfect, slightly cluttered life I was building from scratch, that was the first time I actually felt like I belonged anywhere. Cutting myself off from my mom and Richard wasn't some magic switch that fixed everything overnight. There were days when I felt completely free, and days when the grief hit so hard it knocked the wind out of me. I hadn't just left a house. I'd walked away from the version of my mom I'd grown up clinging to, the one who watched movies with me and told me stories about my dad. Admitting that she was gone long before I left was probably the hardest part. Over time, though, being on my own gave me space to think clearly. I started to see the difference between people who call themselves family and people who actually act like it. My mom and Richard had the money, the country club, the polished photos, the matching last names. On paper, they were the perfect family. But when anything didn't fit their picture, when I didn't fit their picture, they pushed it to the edges until it was out of frame. Their love came with conditions and fine print. Kevin's family, on the other hand, didn't share my DNA or my last name. There was no legal tie, no trust fund, no obligation. But they showed up. They made room at their table without making a big deal about it. They remembered what was going on in my life without needing to be reminded. They didn't try to rewrite my past or pretend my dad never existed. They just accepted that I was a kid trying to figure things out and treated me with basic respect and care. As I got older, heading into college, juggling work and classes, dealing with adult problems, I started realizing that leaving hadn't been an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. If I'd stayed in that house, surrounded by constant reminders that I was less important, I would have shrunk smaller and smaller just to keep the peace. Walking away gave me room to grow into someone who didn't need their approval to feel like he mattered. I still think about my mom sometimes. I wonder if she ever looks at a family photo and notices the empty space where I should be. I wonder if she talks about me, if she tells people I drifted away or got influenced or whatever story makes her look better. Maybe one day she'll reach out in a way that isn't about guilt or control. Maybe she won't. Either way, I've learned that my worth can't hang on a maybe from someone who's already shown me where I rank in their life. Now, at 21, I can actually look back and see the line. Before I left and after I left. Before, everything I did was about trying not to rock the boat, trying to fit into a family that had already decided my role. After, everything became about building something of my own, even if it was small and messy and held together with secondhand furniture and instant noodles. I stopped begging to be chosen and started choosing myself. So yeah, that's how my mom married her shiny new husband, built a perfectly curated family, and slowly erased me from it, and how, on my 18th birthday, I erased myself right back. I won't pretend it was easy or clean or painless. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't have to stay somewhere you're only tolerated just because the people there share your blood. You're allowed to leave. You're allowed to start over. You're allowed to decide that your peace is worth more than someone else's perfect picture. And now, let's bring this back to you for a second. If you've ever felt like the extra piece in your own family, like everyone else got a clear role and you're just there filling space, you're not crazy and you're definitely not alone. A lot of people grow up thinking they have to accept whatever treatment they get from family because that's just how it is. But the truth is, real family, whether they're related to you or not, doesn't make you beg to be seen. They don't treat you like a backup option. If you're comfortable sharing, drop your own story in the comments. Have you ever felt replaced, forgotten, or pushed aside in your own home? Did you stay, or did you get out? People read these comments and realize they're not the only ones going through it, so your story might help someone else feel less invisible. If you made it this far, thanks for hanging out with me and listening to this wild ride from ghost child to actual human being with a life of his own. If you want more stories like this, mess-it-up families, insane drama, petty revenge, or just people finally standing up for themselves, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Because trust me, the next story on deck makes this one look almost normal.